No matter who you are or where you go, heading outside even for a few minutes is always worth it. I'm your host, Amy Bouchatz, and here at Humans Outside, we're using the Humans Outside 365 Challenge to build a life around spending time in nature while hearing from fascinating outdoor-minded guests. As a journalist for 19 years, I've let curiosity be my guide. After my husband's injuries from military service, we started looking for a better way to live. That's why we moved sight unseen to Alaska to see if an outdoor-focused life was the answer. Since September 2017, I've personally spent at least 20 consecutive minutes outside every single day, no matter what, to explore how nature can change my life. Ready to hear from experts and outdoor lovers who make heading into nature just a part of who they are while we work to do the same? Let's go! I never used to think about myself as creative. I'm not an artist. I'm terrible at drawing. Inviting me to play Pictionary is a recipe for disaster. Yeah, I can play the piano, but not well, really. I'm not talented in that way. It took me a while and the help of a few previous podcast guests to realize that when I dismissed myself as non-creative, I ignored that creativity is about way more than being a traditional artist. Creativity is in how you approach the world. I, for example, love problem solving, and I'm great at coming up with solutions to tricky situations that take out-of-the-box thinking. One of my favorite exercises is tackling a problem like the guys in that scene in Apollo 13. If something dire is happening, I envision myself with a box of random junk. My ideal solution rarely is available, so how do I fix whatever is going on with only socks and some tape? And here's something crazy. The longer I've kept up my daily outdoor habit, the better at this I've become. Not only do I feel like I've gotten better at coming up with unique solutions to sticky situations, but it happens more easily, especially when I take that problem solving on a run or a hike or a walk in the woods, or even some quiet time on my back porch. None of this is a surprise to today's guest, Garry Pratt. Based in the UK, Garry has made a specialty out of guiding clients through improving creativity by spending time outside, giving them proven tools and backing it up with all sorts of research. It's all detailed in his new book, The Creativity Factor. And in today's episode, he's going to walk us through the nuts and bolts of creativity, why heading outside works to improve it, and how to get the absolute most out of boosting creativity by spending time in nature. Garry, welcome to Humans Outside.
Thank you, Amy. Pleasure to be here.
So we start our episodes imagining ourselves chatting with our guests in their favorite outdoor space. I'm in the US, you're in the UK. You said you're in London today. So I know we're going to be envisioning ourselves somewhere I've never been. So if we were hanging out outside with you today, somewhere you love, where would we be?
Good question. Well, one answer is anywhere outside a building with square walls, whether that's a park or a hillside or a mountain. But I guess mountains are where I'm most at home, and a big part of why I ended up doing this. So I think they hold a special place in my heart. And if I was to pick some mountains, I'd take you to Morocco. I don't know if you've ever been to Morocco, but it's somewhere I lead trips quite often, and I've spent a lot of time. And the Atlas Mountains in Morocco are, I think, an amazing place just to be and travel. And I often talk to clients and teams I'm taking there that there's also something about being out of your comfort zone, if you like, and I don't mean that in any hardship way. And I think what Morocco brings, especially to Europeans, it's very easy to get to, is all the pleasure of beautiful mountains, but in what is quite a radically different culture to where they got on the plane to where they get off. So I'll take you to the Atlas Mountains in Morocco.
That sounds great. I have not been there, so I'm excited to go there with you today. And I have this sort of like dream of actually physically joining my podcast guests in their specialty wherever they are. So maybe you'll see me in Morocco sometime on one of your trips. That would be so fun. Okay, so fill us in. How did you become somebody who likes to go outside? Tell us your outdoor story, if you will.
Okay, well, it's always been there. I think in retrospect, I was a lucky child. Wasn't from any privileged background, and our holidays were camping trips around the UK. And my parents were people who would never take us to the busy, posh seaside campsite, but to some remote field in Wales or the West Country of England, with very little equipment. So, I think in retrospect, at the time, I was always jealous of friends getting on planes to Spain or something. But when I look back now, I think it was a perfect way to be, just spending your holiday time in fields, mountains, rivers, and streams. So it's always been there for me, and it's sort of, I guess, if you start out that way, it's something. If I had spare time, I would go and explore the mountains of the UK and the countryside. And if I was traveling with my wife, I met at school actually, so I've been with her a long time. Travel's always involved the great outdoors. So I'm not sure there's a massive journey there. It's just always been there. But more recently, and how I've ended up here, is that confluence of actually thinking and working out that it's a place more than just relax. It's a place where you can actually do, I guess, what I'd call deep work. And that came about really through stresses of my own work and realizing that where I went when I needed to sort my head out was outdoors.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing how something that's always there for you. So you give this example of just growing up, always going outside for holidays and whatnot. And I spent all of my youth hanging out on a beach. I grew up on a beach in California, and I spent my time there. But I never thought of it as being everything. I never thought of it as being the secret sauce. It was just sort of the thing. So it's amazing how we have these moments where we realize that almost the light bulb on over your head that, wait a second, this super simple thing is literally right here, and it's been here all along. Yes. And all I have to do is lean into it. And that's how I ended up talking about this. And it's how you ended up, I gather, having your book, that we realize that this secret sauce is literally just there for the taking, and other people need to know about it. And it's so fun to talk about something that's worked so well for you and you're passionate about because you've seen the results. It's a real pleasure. That's why I do this podcast. That's why you have your book.
Absolutely. And I tell a story in the book. After I exited a business about a decade ago now, and I'm actually an archaeologist by training, which is, it does come up in the book a bit, but I sort of had to shoehorn it in. But archaeology is great because it takes place outdoors anyway. But I tell a story that I went back to do a master's in archaeology just for fun, really. And I put myself out of my own comfort zone by going and talking at conferences as part of doing that. And it was terrifying having to talk to your academic peers and present papers. And on one trip, I was flying to Edinburgh for a conference. And by luck again, I guess, I got stuck in traffic on the way there and was worried I wouldn't make it in time to give my presentation. So I got out of the car and walked directly to the conference centre, walked into the lecture theatre, gave my presentation, no time to spare, just picked up my lanyard and went straight in. And it was after that it really came together for me, as I thought, well, that was one of the best presentations I've ever given. My thoughts came, I was fluent and wasn't worried about it at all, didn't have any of those pre-panics because I just spent 40 minutes walking there. So that was my aha moment, if you like, of this does something to your brain when you're just walking.
Yeah. And
obviously now I do that in nature. That was in the city streets of Edinburgh, but that led me into the road of actually what is the science behind this.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we'll talk in a little bit about nature versus, mountains and seascapes and whatnot versus city walks. And I'm excited to kind of dive into that. But I would love to hear you talk about what creativity is. Can you define creativity for us?
Oh, I'm not entirely sure I can, but I think you alluded to it when you started. It's interesting what you said. I'm a bad pianist and a bad sculptor sometimes, so I wouldn't count myself as an artist at all. But I think that's what's important. Creativity is something innately in all of us, and I think we all tend to know that when we're children or when we have children and watch children at play. I think creativity is playing, but what it is being able to imagine something. And imagination and creativity are very, very intertwined. So it's about seeing the world differently. And there's a fantastic quote from Edward de Bono. I don't know if you've come across him, quite a deep thinker. And he says that radical innovation, he uses the term, but I think, in my world, innovation and creativity are very linked.
Right.
But he says it rarely comes from people set in their ways. or know more or have more information, but from those who manage to generate alternative perspectives. And I think that's what's central to creativity, is just being able to see the world differently. And of course, we see that in artists' work. That's why we love art, because they visually represent that different view of the world, or their view of the world. But I don't think it's the preserve of artists. I think it's absolutely in all of us. And one answer or one question is, why isn't everyone creative all the time? And I think we are at heart. We lose it somewhere along the way. And it's not necessarily getting into any discussions about the state of the education system. And I worked in education for a long time, but I think we are all innately creative is one answer.
So what we're saying is that art is the outcome of creativity.
One outcome, absolutely.
Right, is a outcome of creativity. Instead of thinking about art as being creativity, we need to step back and say art is a outcome of creativity, but so is perhaps out of the box thinking, or careful or unique problem solving, or anything else that takes flipping something usual on its side and seeing it in a different way.
Absolutely. And, chefs are creative, aren't they? And that's a different creative process. I don't think anyone would question that. But I think one of the issues in the business world, which is sort of where I come from, it's touted quite often as we want to be creative and innovative, but it's sort of not something that they practice all the time. Whereas, artists practice their creativity continuously.
So, what is outside thinking? And what does it have to do with creativity? This is really the peg of your system. So what is outside thinking?
So the premise of the book is that innovation and being able to innovate and come up with new ideas is a creative process. But if we think even more deeply than that, and I'll come to what I mean by outside thinking, I think there's and I talk about this quite a lot in the book, we are creatures from an evolutionary point of view that were designed to solve problems. One of our key elements is a society and as communities of going back hundreds of thousands of years was to be able to be creative. That's how we maybe invented farming and even how we navigated the world that we were living in. So it's innate in all of us. And my point in outside thinking is, if you apply that to a business world and you accept that you have to have lots of ideas, there's no point thinking about innovation in a half an hour in a meeting room. You need to be doing this all the time. So, and I think a lot of people accept that. There's plenty of science that innovation is creative, and you have to find ways to generate those creative thinking, those imagined futures. My thesis, if you like, is that one real shortcut to doing that is to go outside and use nature to do it, and specifically walking in nature. And we can talk about some of the science around that. So outside thinking is, based on the fact that to be innovative is to be creative. Everyone can be creative. You've just got to find ways to release it. And the outside and traveling in nature is a surefire shortcut to that. So my book is based on bringing lots of other people's good ideas together and hopefully giving some framework in how you can start to generate that creativity and those ideas. And hence outside thinking, because it's thinking outside the box. I guess it's a play on all those old words about, trying to come up with new ideas, but outside as in physically outside as well.
Hey humans, just a quick break to remind you that if you want to build your own outdoor habit, the Humans Outside 365 Challenge is a great way to get started. Cool and exclusive challenge swag, including a finisher medal and a decal, is waiting for you. All you need to do is visit humansoutside.com/challenge. Don't get left out. Go to humansoutside.com/challenge to learn more now. Okay, back to the show. So I want to make sure we are super practical today and give people lots of actionable things that they can do to amp up their own creativity and outside thinking, if you will, after this episode. So first, one more framework concept here. Why is nature perfect for deep creative work? Last thing to convince us that this is the thing we need to do.
There's quite a few answers to that, and if you've read the book or had a look at it, there's quite a few answers. But I guess the few which really resonate with me. One is there's a fantastic Irish neuroscientist called Shane O'Mara, and his work as a neuroscientist and he's a big fan of walking, as he's written a book about it from a sort of neuroscience point of view. But it's a quirk of nature, if you like, or perhaps do with our evolutionary history. The same part of your brain that supports learning, memory, and cognition in this mind wandering are actually the same bit of your brain which is you use for cognitive mapping, so for navigation. So one answer is it's just the way our brains are wired, to make your mind do the things you want it to do creatively is the same part of the brain that you use when you're navigating. And the more you're navigating in natural settings, the more complex that is and the more your brain works. So that's one sort of answer why the outdoors is, the perfect place for this.
Yeah.
I'll give you two more quickly. So I don't know if you've come across attention restoration theory. So this is just about resetting your brain and your body by the use of spending time in nature. And there's plenty of science around attention restoration theory. But again, there's a whole host of science behind that about why being in natural places, in whether that's fresh air, whether it's the sort of fractal patterns of nature, again, are all a shortcut to putting your brain into a stress-free and open place for creativity. And then my specific one, which I love, is the fact that this is by a Norwegian academic called Mia Kainanen, who did research into walking for thinking and worked out there's actually a direct link, that there's an optimal speed which synchronizes your body and thinking. So all those things wrap together in a way that, and I think that's because it's deeply part of our nature and our evolutionary history. We weren't designed to be shut in these square boxes looking at square screens. Well, we were designed to be out navigating nature, making complex decisions. So it's no wonder that being out in nature is a place where creativity flows.
So we're saying that by removing yourself from indoor distractions, whether that be social media or the fact that you need to start cooking dinner now, or your kid can't find their sock, not both socks, just the one. By removing yourself from those situations and taking yourself into a space where they don't exist, and instead you're surrounded by different patterns and things that have nothing to do with your presence, right? There are things that are happening independent of you being there. You are dropped into this area. The earth is breathing, the trees are growing, people are driving by. You're in a new situation. You remove the distractions of inside, and your brain has a chance to have that soft focus. So you could describe it as mind wandering. You could describe it as daydreaming, right? Or that sort of just kind of just staring at, what are you doing? Well, I'm not doing anything. I'm just looking. You give your brain a chance to almost unclog the pipes. I mean, that's a very simplistic term, but that's kind of how it feels, right? Where you are like, oh, hey, and you almost have that light bulb on situation because you gave your brain a chance to maybe just rest a little bit, or it feels like rest because you're not having deep work. Am I describing this accurately?
Yeah, it absolutely is cognitive rest, but there is one caveat here. I'm not going to quote too much science specifically, but another fantastic bit of research by Brian Barnard, an American academic, called Inspired by Distraction. So this is a research paper. So you're absolutely right. This is about getting your brain in the right place. Now, actually getting it to work on creativity, there's one more thing to do. So this experiment was testing people's creative reasoning through a very standard test of creative reasoning. And Brian Barnard and his team took three groups. One of them, they may just slob around, basically, and do nothing. Yeah, so totally relax. They had another group do a quite complex task, and one group do a slightly distracting task. So something, you're doing something, but it's not particularly taxing your brain. And the results are quite staggering. So the group that were doing the slightly distracting task, their creative reasoning went up by about 60% compared to the other two groups. So yes, it's about nature gets your brain in the right place, but there are methods required to properly unlock your, what I'd call outside thinking. So huge benefits to just going out in nature and having a walk or lying on a warm beach or a warm field and let your brain wander. Absolutely. And do your daydreaming. If you want to really use it effectively, you have to be doing some methodology, some tasks. And there's a number of them in my book that I talk about, which we can talk about if you like. But, even side-by-side talking does this. So even just the conversations you're going to have with someone and how your brain will put together patterns, come up with solutions if you're talking through a problem.
Right.
Just doing that together, moving through nature, hits this magic thing called inspired by distraction. So there's a bit more than just going out in nature. Loads of benefits to that, don't get me wrong. But to make it work, there's a little bit more.
Yeah. This would be why I feel like I have great ideas, or it's not even necessarily great ideas. It's this situation where if have a stress in my life, if I go out and do what I'm about to describe, I understand suddenly why I'm stressed, right? I can be very spun up about who knows what, okay? And then I go out and I do this activity, and then I have this moment where I'm like, oh, that's what's wrong. And I really am able to unravel it. And my poor husband, I cannot tell you how many times I have come home just dripping sweat from a run, plop down and say, okay, we're talking about this now. I figured out what's wrong.
Yes.
Bless his heart. But so here's what I've noticed, because I live in a place now in Alaska where I have very easy access to very challenging things. Okay. So my outdoor time could look like going for a simple walk or going for a run that is not very taxing. I'm used to running. It's at a fairly low heart rate, and I go for a long run where I'm just very much just on pavement and running at the same speed the whole time. I'm working, but I'm not working very, very hard. Okay. So in that situation, or in going for a walk, if I take a friend and I go in that situation where we're chatting side by side, just like you said, that happens. I notice that if I go for an easy ski, that same sort of lower heart rate where I'm not working super hard, but I am somewhere unique. If I go for a low key, maybe snowshoe, these sorts of things. So I'm moving and I have a distraction like you just described, but I'm not being very, very, very active or very, very stressed. It's a conversational speed, if you will. That happens then. When it does not happen, I get other benefits, don't get me wrong, but this problem solving does not happen when I go and do a hard workout. If I go and try to do a big hike, right, where I'm very, very taxed and I'm hiking very uphill for a long time. Maybe my good ideas happen when I'm coming back down, when my heart rate's lower and I'm less taxed. But I do notice that I don't experience this sort of distraction thinking that you're talking about when I'm very, very under stress. So that's exactly what you're describing.
Absolutely right. And when I lead walks, and going back to Morocco, I took a group out there recently, and we did do something quite challenging and went up quite the tallest peak in Morocco in one of the days. But the rest of the time we were walking, I have to prepare them for how slow we're going to go.
Yeah.
And quite often some of the group, at the outset, sort of complain, or you can see them getting a bit frustrated because I'm making them go at a pretty slow pace because I want them to get all of those benefits.
Right.
At the end of the day, when you reflect and you find out they've had really deep conversations, they've sorted their thoughts out, and you're absolutely right. If we'd done it at how quickly can we bag these peaks or get up this slope, you wouldn't have had those benefits.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right.
Yeah. Which all of those peak bagging, slope hitting stuff has its own benefits. This just isn't the top of the list one of them. So don't say, oh, I'm never doing that again. But this is just, and you're right. I mean, I can totally put myself with your groups because I am 100% a let's get to the destination kind of gal. And it is very difficult for me to stop and smell the roses and take my time on, especially if this is an out and back thing. One way I work through this is I say, and we talk about this with Humans Outside with the 20 minutes, right? You're out here for at least 20 minutes. This is not a destination other than time. So you have this time. You can go far or not, or you can go slow. The 20 minutes is still going to be 20 minutes, no matter what you do during it. And so why not take that time to take the benefits? Also, every day is a lot of time. Every single day. That's every day. And you can do creativity thinking today, and you can do peak bagging tomorrow. There's every day of your life, and you have more than enough time to use the outdoors for all of the different benefits that it has. So we've talked a little bit about this right here, that this is how you create this space for effective mind wandering and for effective creativity.
Absolutely. And I use a phrase often, just, it's the freewheeling. And it's a good phrase for people because, and maybe it's back to thinking yourself more childlike in the paths ahead of you. But if you see a nice bit of woodland on your left or a stream on your right, allow yourself to free will and spend time going to see it. It's not about the destination and how quickly you get there. But also to your 20 minutes, which I love because it's something that I talk about as well. And it is a magical sort of number. I think the really important thing I like about the 20 minutes is achievable in lots of circumstances. And the important thing is that I think that it's a sort of freewheeling, doesn't really matter what you're doing. Well, my only rule really is no tech. Take that distraction away, and then your 20 minutes can be really effective.
Yeah, we love to encourage people to take a picture of their outdoor time, but it can slide so quickly into I'm now looking at the pictures on my phone, and now I'm posting the pictures on my phone. And I mean, we don't want anybody to be unsafe. Take your phone with you so that you have that connectivity if that's what makes you feel good. Practice leaving it behind if you can. I go on runs periodically without any stuff. I don't have a hydration vest. I don't have any way to carry it, and I don't listen to music. So I work really hard to practice leaving it behind now and then, but I often, most of the time actually, have my phone with me when I'm outside, and I'm trying to build this practice of if I take it out to take a picture of putting it right away again. I will say, guys, winter is great for this. It is too darn cold to have your hands out of gloves and looking at your phone. And those touch screen gloves don't work very well. And so I personally find winter to be the best way to cut the cord because it's just too cold. I've got these big mittens on. I can't do anything with the phone anyway, even if I wanted to. So I just practice sticking that sucker back into my pocket. But I do want to hear about this 20-minute rule that you have, and you talk about a 23-3. You reference in your book Michael Easter, who wrote The Comfort Crisis. He's got a new book coming out soon. I plan to have him on the podcast to talk about that. He talks something about something similar to this, and I want you to tell us what is 23-3, and then if you could give us maybe some ideas of how to leverage it in a non-business environment, right? So your book talks about using this with teams and your business creativity, but we've got lots of problems in our lives that are not business related, and I want to know how we can leverage this for that kind of thing. So, okay, 23-3, what is it?
Well, yes, and it's pretty much is stolen from Michael, who sort of after his experience, did the sort of science behind some of this. But I take it and through my own experience, I guess, of working with teams. So it's pretty simple. It's designed to be your 5 a day, I guess, for your fruit and veg. So my 23-3 rule is 20 minutes a day walking in nature. And I'm very broad about what I term nature. So I'm not saying you have to find the wilderness. The first 3 is 3 hours every 2 weeks on a walk or hike or time in nature. And the final 3 is 3 days a quarter properly out in nature, away from your office, home, doing something outdoors in nature. So that's the 23-3 rule, and I hope it's something I've practiced myself and experienced and see the benefits, and teams that I work with have seen the same benefits. But to your point, also a lot of individuals now, especially, well, very much aligned with what you do, can easily adopt the 20 minutes. And I think anyone can probably fit in their 3-hour trip every few weeks into their work life. And the 3 days a quarter, that may be more of a challenge for people, but I think it's a good aspiration.
Yeah.
So it's definitely adapted for Michael, but through my work and experience is something I think really resonates with people. And I now have as teams who we're constantly booking the next 3-day trip. So, it's great because they've embedded it into their routines. Right. So yes, you're right that most of my actual practitioner work is with teams and groups. I think they'd all say that what they get out of it is as much individual as what's for the company or the team. So there's definitely a crossover, and I've used a few phrases as I've talked about the book and worked with more people. One is that playing hooky might be the deepest work you'll ever do. And that's sort of born out of the sense of the future of work, and that obviously I feel that, this is work and can be work, but it's also a reflection that trying to force this is work, this is life is a fallacy, because it's all life and it's very hard to put up those walls. So using this stuff just for your own thinking and well-being and to work out what you want to do with your life is also a creative process. Your imagined future doesn't need to be what the company's going to do next or what your product innovation. It can absolutely be what you want to do with your life. It's the same process of using your creative juices to come up with imagined futures and work through problems that way.
But I do love this 20-minute idea for business. Many of the people listening to this probably, they're employed, they might be running their own business, they're tackling problems on their teams that they work with. And when you take 20 minutes, maybe it's in addition to the 20 minutes that you would otherwise be doing, to take a work problem outside, I think that's really powerful, because it comes back to this idea of being intentional. Right? That to go outside, to spend that time, you have to be intentional, because you have to actually take an action to do it. And then why not take it a step further and be intentional about what you're doing or pondering while you're out there? So when I will take a walk in the middle of my workday with my dogs, who really like the idea themselves for their own reasons, and I'll take it in frustration, right? That something has happened that is bugging me, or people aren't doing what I want them to do. And I end up thinking about work things outside. But I shouldn't have to do that just because I'm frustrated. I should be able to say, okay, I've got this major problem or this, tiny issue, and I can take it for a walk and see if I can come up with something, or at least have a fresh perspective on how much this is bothering me by the time I get back. All part of my important strategy of lowering my stress level, which my doctor and I agree is probably a good idea. The other thing I wanted to say, though, is that this 3 days a quarter thing is harder in sometimes years than others, right? So it becomes more a matter of privilege if it's very cold outside and you can't just go pitch a tent somewhere comfortably, right? But it could also just be a matter of intentionality for many of us. Scheduling 3 days away from the real world, quote unquote, takes work. That actually takes work. You have to think about what you're going to do. You have to think about where you're going to go. You have to think about all of the logistics around making that happen. Can you take your dogs with you? Who's going to watch them if you can't? What happens with your kids? Are they going to come too? Who's going to pack the food? There's a lot of logistics around there. Okay, it is work, because we take trips into the wilderness quite frequently, about once a quarter actually, to go to a dry cabin or something in the wintertime, or go camping in the summertime more often than that. And I'll tell you what, the work around making that happen, it makes me want to not do it. At least on the front end, right? It's oh my gosh, I have to think about what are we going to eat for 3 days, and plan every single snack, because otherwise we don't have enough food, on and on. So when I get there and when I come home, I can tell you 100% without a doubt, it is worth it. It is worth it. It is worth it. It is worth it. I am glad we did it. I am glad I went through all of the logistical pain of doing it. It's like any vacation. While you and I are talking about this, I am fresh off a week of vacation with my family. All of the logistics of planning that are on me. And boy, howdy, is it a lot of work. But I'm not sitting here sorry that I went at all. So...
Yeah, well, I'm glad you lived that experience, because that's absolutely what I try and get people to experience, and have that light bulb moment that, this is really effective. And there is good science behind the 3 days. There's another paper I cite by Ruth Ashley, which took groups on, not to go into all the detail, but again, took them on different trips for different lengths. And the 3 days, again, is one of those real trigger points where you have a massive increase in your brain's ability to process information. So there's something in day 3, and absolutely when I take trips, I get that feedback that, I joke, there's a group I've taken very often, and when I first started taking them, I now realize that day 1 is a bit like letting a group of puppies go for a run. They just got to get rid of everything. So very little happens, or it appears on day 1, and then it progresses. And day 3 is where you properly get insight, and your brain's, as you described, that sort of coming back from that day 3 and absolute feeling you've sorted stuff out in some way. So there's some good science behind it. But I totally get the practicalities of doing it. But also I'm not strict in. I think you have to. Well, ideally, you'd be spending that time in nature, but I don't think you have to have carried everything off to a remote cabin. I think you can, go home to a nice bed in a hotel in the evening and have a nice meal if you like, as long as the bulk of that time is spent, in nature. I'm quite flexible on getting people to experience that, although, I'd like them to do the wilderness cabin in the end. But, maybe that's their 5th trip. They've got up the courage to do that.
Right. So you alluded to this a few minutes ago. We talked about it a little bit earlier. Does type of nature matter here? Is nature, or does it have to be the Grand Canyon or some mountaintop?
I talk about this in the book, and I think all nature has its benefits, and there's some structure in the book about the types of things that you might think about how you might frame questions in different environments. So whether you're in a city park or this wilderness, I think they all have benefits. I think the more you are away from your normal life, the better. And when I started talking to you, I talked about Morocco, and I do think there's something about being slightly out of your comfort zone. And I don't mean that has to be physically. It can, socially, in terms of just being in a different country or place. That's has its own benefits. So it's definitely a ratcheting up, but it's got to be about you as well. Some people just won't be comfortable in a remote cabin. So you don't want to put yourself in a wilderness or an outdoor situation which is causing you too much stress, because that's sort of defeating the object, maybe. So I'm sure that's different for everyone. But I think it's number 1 is about having some type of nature around you. I'm sat here in the centre of London, but I've got a river outside the window, and I can see the river flowing. And that's, if I sit and stare at that, I know it'll do something to my brain.
Yeah.
So I think is that I've got a very broad church when it comes to what that is. I think there are benefits the more you do embrace nature, but I wouldn't advise someone to take their first trip, doing this maybe to your remote cabin in Alaska, maybe. Maybe that's a step too far for them. Although I think Michael Easter, obviously, he definitely saw benefits to doing that.
Absolutely. Well, it's not as scary as it sounds. We drive up to it typically. So there's that. The car is a stone's throw away should you need an easy escape. Can you give us 3 or 4 practical ways people can take this creativity work outside, no matter the weather, what they can do to practically apply this?
Yeah, well, probably like you, it sounds. I'm a bit of an ignorer of the weather. I think most weather is just having the right kit. So I wouldn't think weather too much. Torrential rain's not particularly nice for anyone. Generally, I ignore weather, just make sure you've got the right clothes on. In terms of practically doing it, I think From a daily point of view, then, there's a tiny shift you can make. And the obvious ones are thinking about your walk commute to work or where you might be going and making sure that goes through nature somehow. So that's really easy for your 20 minutes. At work, just getting up off your desk and saying to a colleague, let's go outside to the park or along the riverbank and have this conversation as opposed to sitting in a cramped room. So those are really easy things people can do on a daily basis. I think I've got a number of sort of techniques, and the one that resonates and is interesting, this is sort of early New Year. There's a technique called the 3 stones make a wall in my book, which is born out of archaeology, and I won't go again into the detail, but the idea is you talked about having a sort of something you want to think about or a question carried with you. I use this technique, which people seem to love, which is to write some things on stones and keep them in their pocket and walk with them, and then I make them only keep one. Or it's a bit of a tweak on it, depending if it's a group or an individual. But as an individual, you might write some things you want to think about on your stones, and you don't have to have your notebook with you. Just put them in your pocket and you go for your walk, and at the end you've got to throw 2 away and keep one of them. And it sounds really simple, but it's the one technique that people love. And I say it's because a New Year thing, because I was leading a walk just actually on New Year's Day, and we did it for the equivalent of a sort of New Year's resolution. What's important this year? And a really simple technique. And I like the fact that it's a stone because it's a bit of nature, but I also like the fact that you just stick them in your pocket. It's a bit like having a to-do list, but there's something physical about it. So there are some simple things people can do.
Yeah. There are way too many suggestions in the back of your book on what to do and how to do this and really lay it out. But if people want to read them, they most certainly should buy your book, because I found them all very useful. And in fact, I thought while I was lounging in a chair in the sun, not thinking about work, I'm going to come back to these later to tackle some problems at work, because these are so rich and useful. So your book is available wherever books are sold online, or where can people get it?
Well, in the UK, it's available now anywhere books are sold. The US version is published on the 24th of January. Will assumably be available where people buy their books and online. It's available in ebook and also an audiobook, which, I wouldn't be against someone going for a walk and listening to my book. That's a good use of tech. It's not me reading it. A very fine voice actor has read it, which people tell me has a very soothing voice. So, I'll listen to Nathaniel read it if you like.
Great. Thank you. So by the time people hear this, they will be able to find your book online, which is awesome. It's a worthwhile read. And thank you so much, Garry, for joining us on Humans Outside today. I sure appreciate your time and your help with this creativity topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. I've loved it. And I just hope, like you're doing, that, simple call is, accept that it's a good thing to do in all ways for your body, but also for your mind.
Thanks so much for listening to this week's episode of Humans Outside. Help me out by leaving a 5-star rating or review wherever you get your podcasts. It really does help other listeners find the podcast too. Now, go, get outside. Until next time, we'll see you out there.